devil can quote scripture for his own
Mallard?
purposes.
It is Assistant President. I know. Sorry. Just got a bit of a quote today. Mr. Assistant President, I rise to speak in support of the Strata Schemes Development Bill 2015 and the Strata Schemes Management Bill 2015 being dealt with cognitely. I do so as a member of the Liberal Nationals Party government that has been elected twice now on the promise and record of meaningful reforms in this state. Reforming our transport systems and our infrastructure, recycling assets and recycling capital, reforming our planning systems, all reforms that this government is proud of and pursuing, and many more designed to deliver a stronger and more sustainable economy for the people of New South Wales into the future. And the reforms we have before us today are another set designed to unlock the potential of our state. Now, Sydney is increasingly a city of medium and high density living, and it has been a path of urban development largely since World War II, but with the notable exceptions of Potts Point, Kings Cross and Elizabeth Bay, where high-density urban living in apartments emerged after the First World War. This is not new to Sydney. The two concurrent bills before us deal with many matters designed to improve the lives of those who choose to live in strata schemes. I will come back to some of those elements of the legislation shortly. But initially, I want to focus on the renewal of strata schemes, which we've just heard about, as I expect that this is the more contested elements of the reforms before us, and that will no doubt be exploited in a fear campaign by those on the opposition benches. Currently, the old system of strata laws is holding back the city and holding back at a time when upward pressure on housing prices is making Sydney unaffordable for many people, something the previous speaker failed to acknowledge. At present, 25% of the population of Greater Sydney lives in strata title properties. That's 25%. And by the year 2040, half of Sydney's residential accommodation will be strata titled. And there are approximately 75,000 strata title schemes registered in New South Wales at the moment, with over 100 new schemes being registered every month. The majority of these residential schemes, approximately 7,200, are schemes zoned for business uses, such as retail and commercial, with 3,200 zoned for other purposes, including industrial, non-urban, environmental living and tourism. The most significant reform in this bill is a new process to facilitate the collective sale or renewal of strata schemes. This bill will enable strata owners to make collaborative decisions about their strata building and about their future. Collaborative decisions about their future. Members, if I can get you to cast your mind to the great swathes of apartment buildings built not long after the war in the 50s and 60s. The red brick walk-ups in the not-too-distant suburbs like Ryde, Ashfield, North Sydney and Bondi. In fact, you can find examples of these older strata buildings in nearly every suburb of Sydney and in many country and regional centres as well. Now, many of us, I assume, have lived in them. I certainly have. I lived in an older strata apartment in West Ryde whilst I was at Macquarie University. Indeed, they are familiar to all of us. Let me remind you what they're like.
The sooner they're replaced with something much better, the better.
I acknowledge the interjection because it's in line with my next point. With features like four flights of steep stairs, non-compliant with BCA today, small bathrooms and smaller windows, no or very poor flow-through ventilation, very poor environmental amenity, very poor social and mobility features, all common in most and mostly mandated today in new era buildings, and of course have poor common spaces, if they have any at all, and poor common facilities. These older apartment blocks, they have above ground car parks on grade, they have no water recycling and very little regard for architectural merit. And these are often 3-bedroom apartments which have become socially obsolete, where today families are smaller and traditionally multi-room housing has given way to much more open plan living. And I might add, they're not tech savvy. They're difficult to retrofit with technology, the latest technologies, and you can see evidence of that with regard to installation of computers and internet into those older buildings is quite a problem for the body corporates. These buildings are heading upwards towards 70 years of age and are basically maintenance black holes. Building materials and standards of the period of construction are not up to the standards of today. And many owners find themselves trapped in a building crumbling around their ears. Concrete cancer, poor foundations and footings, and sometimes asbestos has been used in the construction. And many of these buildings, and this is an important point to note, many of these older buildings are situated in ideal renewal corridors of our city. They're close to shops, close to amenities, close to railway stations, close to bus services, much more better suited than many of the newer projects we're seeing built today in further out suburbs. These are ideal sites for renewal to assist the state meet its housing targets and maintain downward pressure on housing prices for the younger generation in the house market today. The issue of lowering the threshold for strata sales and renewals has been on the agenda of the state for nearly 20 years. I'm aware of I recall attending consultations in this regard in the early 2000s with the then Shadow Planning Minister John Brogden, and later on with the Shadow Planning Minister Peter Seaton, who were both looking at the issue of reforming stratas at that time. And indeed, I do recall Labor talking about this in the previous government, but this was a non-reformist government that just kicked around reform but never actually got on with it. And as the Minister stated in the other place, the majority of community feedback received on the strata reform discussion paper acknowledged that the decision to end a strata scheme should not require 100% support of owners, provided that the process is flexible, transparent and fair. Now, to that end, the proposed new renewal process will require the support of 75% of strata owners and also 75% of lot owners. It's a multi-stage process with built-in checks and balances. Frankly, it's not an easy process to get through. And as the number of lots in a strata scheme increases in modern stratas, it will become much harder to achieve the unanimous agreement on any one issue. Now, you've got to acknowledge that buildings built today, right, while we're having this debate, in 40 years' time or so, will be looking to strata renewal as well. And lots in buildings today, and I've been involved in this with Green Square and in the City of Sydney, sometimes have 1,000 apartments in a strata. So imagine the difficulty of getting 1,000 apartments to agree to renewal in, say, the end of this century. Now, these reforms bring New South Wales into line with most other international jurisdictions, including the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Canada and the Northern Territory, which is not international, but it's far away, I acknowledge that they are variations on the model we've got today, but the principle of renewal is the same. Now, this isn't about making it easier to knock down existing strata apartments. It's about enabling owners collectively to have more options available to them when it comes to improving or renewing their ageing apartment block. That's why there are important safeguards to protect the interests of individual owners. The existing schemes, first of all, need to opt in. This is not retrospective. They have to vote to opt into this proposal. It proceeds if there is a collective sale. If there is a collective sale of a block, proceeds if there is a collective sale of the block will be divided between lot owners according to unit entitlement in a fully transparent way. What failed to be mentioned by the previous speaker, because I don't think he wanted. Well, I don't think he wanted us to acknowledge that there's an independent umpire. Is that the Land and Environment Court is empowered to adjust unit entitlement if it has not been previously determined fairly. So unit entitlements will be updated by the Land and Environment Court. An independent oversight will be provided by the Land and Environment Court, which will have to approve a sale of a strata, has the ability to reject the sale of a strata if it's not satisfied that it's just and equitable principles have been followed. No acknowledgement of that independent umpire in the last speech. The Land and Environment Court, which is an independent body, will have to approve the strata. It has to approve the strata process and then the sale. Indeed, the government has agreed to provide provisions to cover the legal costs of the dissenters of the body corporate if they object from the strata scheme, which deals with the issue which you raised, Mr. Primrose. Honourable Peter Primrose, in regards to the so-called widow, a 90-year-old widow, not wanting to go to the solicitors. Now, members, with various checks and balances, including the oversight and the approval of the powerful Land and Environment Court, this is a robust reform that will protect parties involved in the minority to the extent that they will not be disadvantaged. Now, I know some in the other place, and no doubt here, and in fact it has happened, will talk about those who may be in this situation, pejoratively referred to as the little old lady, or we just heard the little old widow. Now, whilst I do not subscribe to the term, I appreciate the sentiment. Protections for the vulnerable, these are a strong central feature of this legislation. But conversely, there are many examples where some people, whether they are the widow or not, are trapped in a crumbling aged strata building, unable to sell so that they can live in a better suited property for their needs in that stage of their life. There are also examples of greedy squatters holding out for a better deal before they'll vote to unanimous, whether they will vote for the unanimous resolution to sell a strata. Now, they may be an investor with a tenant who's holding out for basically a better deal for themselves at the expense of the other strata holders. So holding out for windfall, extortionate profit, no non-transparent and probably, frankly, a secret commission. This legislation will go a long way to ending that behaviour through lowered threshold for the strata sale, independent adjudication by the courts and legal requirement of transparency. Now let me turn to some of the other characteristics of the bills, which I note the opposition said that they'll be supporting. Stopping the improvement and renewal of current schemes is forcing apartment dwellers to live in poor quality environments, often living in deteriorating buildings built for a different time and to different standards. Now, owing to the current framework, those who are part of a strata scheme have little means of being able to make improvements to themselves or to advocate for a collective solution to maintenance and other issues of their strata. Now, this reform addresses both these issues. Excellent. With a more flexible process for lot owners to undertake renovations. Current laws require lot owners to seek approval of the owners' corporation for even minor changes to their lot. This results in broad non-compliance. So many people in apartments go ahead and do the changes without the approval, as many owners simply proceed with renovations without seeking consent because they consider the formal approval process to be too onerous. This bill introduces a three-tiered approach. Firstly, the renovation or work will not affect their residents and does not interfere with the structural, waterproofing or external appearance of the building, then a full special resolution, that is 75%, which is required at the moment, is not required in the future to be undertaken. Secondly, approval not required for cosmetic work, which includes installing picture hooks, carpets, paintings, and filling minor holes and cracks in the apartment. It's unbelievable that you have to get that approval at this point. The next level is for minor renovations, which will require only a general resolution at a meeting, a simple majority. And this includes kitchen renovations, as long as waterproofing is not affected, replacing cupboards, installing cabling or wiring, and importantly, installing timber or hardwood floors. Lot owners will need to provide adequate information on minor renovations, such as work plans, timing and contractors' details. Once provided with this information, the owners' corporation will not be able to unreasonably refuse minor renovations. To enforce this, the tribunal is given the additional power to make orders to that effect. Now, importantly, owners' corporations will be able to make bylaws that deem certain types of work to be cosmetic or minor renovations for the purpose of their scheme, as long as the bylaw is consistent with the Act. Major work, such as moving structural walls or enclosing a veranda, will require approval by special resolution of the owners' corporation as is currently required, and probably the council, I would suggest. The three-tiered approach allows owners' corporations to tailor a process to suit their circumstances and their particular building's needs. Let me talk about pets and smoke drift. As a councillor on the City of Sydney, these two issues were regularly raised with me as a local councillor. The new model bylaws will be introduced when the regulations are made to deal with a number of issues that are of importance to strata residents, pets and smoke drift. We're amending the existing bylaws to make it easier for schemes to become more pet-friendly. Indeed, the evidence is in that responsible pet ownership leads to more harmonious communities, harmonious neighbourhoods, and leads to personal, healthier and happier lives. In fact, pet ownership in apartments, particularly in inner-city areas, is known to be good for mental health of residents, and I don't think we can deny that. So a scheme can make its own bylaws, but it cannot unreasonably refuse the keeping of animals, which at the moment they can, nor can it prevent a resident from keeping an assistance animal. The tribunal will still retain the power to make an order for the removal of an animal from a strata scheme that is a nuisance or a hazard. The bylaws will also be introduced to address the annoying and unhealthy issue of smoke drift. Wouldn't mind those bylaws in the Parliament, let me say. This bill notes that smoke drift can be considered to be a nuisance or a hazard if it interferes with the rights of residents to use or enjoy their lot, and I've experienced that myself. I've got 4 minutes. Enforcement is also made easier. Part 7 also introduces a new streamlined enhancement by law to enforcement process. The maximum penalty for bylaw breach will be increased from 5 to 10 penny units to reflect strata standards. As I mentioned earlier, there is a provision within this bill to address the issue of defects. We've all heard about developers out there building strata apartment blocks with little regard to the quality of the fittings, the fixtures, the walls, the waterproofing, and indeed I've experienced fire standards through the City of Sydney. Addressing this issue is vital to ensuring that people moving into new strata apartments do not need to engage in prolonged, legal and costly battles against shelf companies that have long since collapsed. The new process of bonds aims to reduce the cost to all parties involved, provide more certainty and minimise time delays, and reduce the incidence of drawn-out and expensive legal action. It is simply a structural process to promote issues being brought to the forefront early in the building's life and get them resolved quickly and cost-effectively. So I'd like to turn to my opening comments. This is a government determined on broad-ranging reform agenda. This legislation is part of a reform agenda that the new government is introducing, and this follows 15 years of Labor inertia in this area. The 2 bills before us today have had nearly 20 years of gestation. I have participated in many stakeholder forums on issues addressed in these bills. The reforms from strata sale to smoke drift are very welcomed by the sector, an important economic and fundamentally an important economic reform for our city to help improve affordability of housing. I commend the bills to the House.